I'm going to pass over to our final speaker, which is George Rhodes. George is the director and co-founder of Label, which is an accessibility consultancy company committed to developing accessible and inclusive services. He's also an author of the internationally recognised accessibility statements research. George received a first-class honours in computer science and has been working in the public sector for 6 years. And is currently working as an accessibility expert for the Home Office. So George will be talking to us today about the public sector regulations and also around the regulations around captioning for institutions and all that good stuff. So George, without further ado, I'll pass over to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, take it away.
Brilliant, thanks, Ed. Yeah, what a great intro. my kind of entire history there. I guess the only bit I think we missed off is I'm currently doing my PhD on tactile maps to support vision impaired users as well. So my ever-growing list of stuff. I'm afraid I'm probably not going to have as many jokes and things as earlier on. My topic's definitely dry and a bit more serious, as Ed and Richard have both said. I'm going to be talking about regulations. I'm going to be talking about the challenges of financing certain services. So going to be a bit more dour for the final session, but we'll try and keep it light. So let's see how we go. Let me share my screen, and I can run you through some of my slides. So, as I mentioned, I work for Label. This is one of the things that we get involved in quite a lot, talking about the regulations, talking about very specific parts of it that I'm going to come on to when it comes to captioning and when it comes to things like disproportionate burden. For those of you who are blissfully unaware of the regulations up until now, sorry to bring this to your attention. You can never go back. These regulations came into effect on the 23rd of September 2018, and they require all public sector bodies to take the necessary measures to make their websites and mobile applications more accessible by making them perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. These are the 4 principles that define the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, the most recent version of which is 2.1, and under law we have to try and make sure everything conforms to the AA standards, which is about 50 different success criteria. So these are a rather complicated set of regulations. They build on existing equality law, such as the Disability Discrimination Act and the Equality Act. This is just the latest step in us trying to make sure that we're really treating everyone fairly. Couple more slides on what this really means for everybody. In terms of audio and video content, there's a few exemptions. There's a few things we need to be aware of. Existing video content prior to September 23rd, 2020 is exempt under the regulations. So an awful lot of the content we already have, old lecture recordings, old video and audio from any other source, is exempt if it was made prior to 2020. Live video content is also exempt under the regulations, but all new content must conform to WCAG requirements, which covers captions, audio descriptions, and media alternatives such as transcripts. So this as Richard kind of touched on earlier, stealing some of my thunder there, is quite a serious thing for us to now get our heads around, because the feed-in from what was the government digital service but is now coming back internally to the Cabinet Office, they have suggested that only 100% perfect captions are regulation compliant. This came to us in direct communications, one of the other things that I do is I sit on a board called the Further and Higher Education Digital Accessibility Working Group. This reports back to the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Assistive Technology on occasion, and we talk about quite a lot of things that are affecting the further and higher education sectors when it comes to accessibility, and in particular the new regulations. So this was quite troubling news for us. 100% captions, it's one of those things that is almost impossible without really significant manual effort over the last few years, and this means we've got some really big challenges ahead of us. So further and higher educations are both covered by the regulations. Some may have the odd exemption here and there, but for the main, all colleges, all universities, all further and higher education are covered. In addition, given the impact that we've seen over the last year and 2 months, 3 months now of COVID-19, online working has become vastly more important. It's become the norm. It's become the way we do things. And this means that lecture recordings, seminar recordings, all teaching content has been being delivered virtually. And this has made it far more commonplace, and the requirement for captions far more asked for than ever before. Some organisations are recording thousands of hours of content now, and this is then going to put a massive strain on how we meet those regulation requirements. So all doom and gloom so far, yeah, going well. I'd like to talk to you briefly about a little case study from a university that I was involved with a little while back. This was a customer of ours that we worked with. This was taking a look at how much it cost them previously to do the level of captions that they were doing versus how much they would theoretically be required to spend to meet the regulation requirement of 100% perfectly accurate captions. So we had some numbers from back in the 2018-2019 school year. The university recorded about 15,000 hours of lecture content and a few other bits and pieces, large events, other things here and there. That led to about 173,000 hours of that content being viewed, which I think is something like 11.4 views per lecture or something like that, or per hour of content. So really relatively good use out of a lot of these, and obviously that was distributed. So some were being viewed 50 or more times, some a lot less. So it was obvious that the lecture recordings were a valuable resource to students. All that being said, auto captioning was applied to the majority of those recorded hours. And then in addition, 50 hours of content were completely 100% manually updated to be perfectly accurate captions. All in all, this cost about £6,600 for the university over that year. And this mainly worked to address perfectly accurate captions for those who required it within their ILPs, and encouraging automated captions for everyone else. Moving on to what would be required for the regulations, we're looking at about 23,000 hours of lectures and other recordings, so about an 8,000 hour increase if we demand that all lectures are recorded. All of these must be 100% accurate. We looked into alternatives, we looked into cost benefit analysis, and we did look at how much we could get away with in terms of auto captioning doing the bulk of the legwork. We looked at mixing auto captioning and manual fixes and transcribing as well, and even then, with everything we could possibly do, the expected cost was still coming out at around £3 million, which was significantly more than the entire student support and wellbeing budget for that particular university. So it's just not a feasible solution at all. And I've spoken to many universities about this subject, and I've spoken to quite a number of colleges as well, and this is what we're seeing across the board. You know, it's a very similar situation for many organizations. So we're now at this point where we have to think about, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do as a sector about this to ensure that we're trying to meet the regulations as much as we possibly can, but also taking into account all the other factors and still making sure that we're providing the best service we possibly can to our students. So we had to think about it, and some of the recommendations I've got for you today are just try and be as pragmatic as possible when dealing with this particular conundrum. You know, one of the things we've found is some captions is often better than no captions. So think about using inbuilt tools. We've seen in the chat, many people are commenting on the inbuilt capability of Panopto. Many organizations are using Teams or other platforms such as Zoom now. Most have some form of inbuilt captioning that is variable depending on people's experience. There are also, as with Captions, many very useful services out there that you can add on to really improve your captions. Take a very practical approach, ensure the highest accuracy captions are there for those that really need them, for your deaf students, for your students who have ILPs that mean they really value those perfectly accurate captions, and try and make sure captions are available to all students. You know, we've had such incredibly positive feedback from a whole range of students, both with additional access needs and without, who have really appreciated captions being available on all their lecture recordings. Other practical actions to be taken, you know, educate staff. It's always a hard time getting everyone on board with the accessibility journey. So, you know, do what you can, try and speak to your academics, try and speak to your lecturers, try and speak to your support staff and encourage them to be aware of the tools they've got at their fingertips, to be aware of the stuff that they can do to really improve student experience. And then finally, the most boring bit is look at what regulation clauses are open to you. You know, at the end of the day, we've still got to get the paperwork done. Within the regulations, there's a clause called disproportionate burden. You should also be doing equality impact assessments. I'll tell you briefly about disproportionate burden and why you have to be very careful when using it. So disproportionate burden is a very special clause within the regulations, and it does allow you to avoid needing to be compliant for a time for very specific things of which you have to claim for. To do this, you have to have very substantive evidence to back up your claim. And from personal experience, one of my previous pieces of research that again went back to the European Commission and has been highly discussed was the absolute rifeness, the absolute widespread nature of disproportionate burden claims that did not have suitable evidence to back them up. I'd seen responses to FOI's freedom of information requests asking about disproportionate burden claims that said, oh, we've made a claim that came out of an informal discussion between two members of staff and it wasn't recorded anywhere. You know, you're making a legal claim based on an informal discussion between two members of staff. It's just not appropriate at all. So you need to be thinking really hard about when you do this and the kind of evidence you want to show in order to say, we may not be meeting the regulations, but we've got a very practical and pragmatic approach in place. Here's all the stuff we're doing, here's why we're doing it that way, and here's how we're making sure that we're still providing the best services we can to our students. So you need to think about how this is changing your current responsibilities. You need to look at options for cost reduction, including looking at alternative accessible products. You know, as I've talked about, auto captioning solutions, other stuff that's inbuilt into your existing platforms, the available resources you have, the timescales in which you can make improvements, how long is it going to take you to get these things embedded in your organization, the impact on disabled users. So again, looking at those equality impact assessments, making sure you're really taking into account how this is going to affect those students that need those services the most, cost benefit analysis, and then possible remediations. So all of the other things you can do to improve accessibility for your entire student journey, alongside this one specific thing that you're claiming disproportionate burden for. So a lot there. Sorry it's really dry. Sorry it's all talking about regulations and some of the real challenges we've got, but it's a topic that's coming up time and time again across the sector, across all of these conversations that I have with different people, and it's something that I'd really like people to be a bit more aware of and know some of the first steps to take in order to tackle this. Thanks very much for listening. If anyone wants to get in touch with us, my Twitter and the All Able Twitter's there. If anyone's up on social media, again, please check out our website. Please feel free to email us on this or any of the other services and support we provide. Thank you very much.